The sun dipped low over Hollywood Boulevard, its golden light painting the bustling street with an almost ethereal glow. Tourists shuffled past, their laughter mingling with the melodies of street performers and the rhythmic hum of passing cars. Shoppers carried designer bags, their eyes fixed forward, oblivious to the pockets of struggle that lined the glittering streets. Among this chaos of life and color, one corner seemed steeped in shadow, an island of silence amid the noise. There sat Jack. His late 30s bore the weight of decades, his face weathered and etched with lines of exhaustion. His clothes hung loosely, a patchwork of wear and grime, while his unkempt hair fell over tired eyes that betrayed years of hopelessness. A weathered cardboard sign rested in his lap, the words scrawled with shaky hands. "Hungry. Anything helps." Jack's stomach growled, a painful reminder of its emptiness. He glanced down at the meager pile of coins before him, barely enough for a slice of stale pizza. With every passing figure, Jack felt his invisibility deepen. The bustling crowd moved as if he didn't exist, their footsteps loud yet meaningless. It wasn't the hunger that cut deepest, but the isolation. Was this his fate? To fade quietly into the background, unseen and forgotten? He exhaled sharply, the thought too heavy to linger on. Slowly, he began to gather his belongings, what little there was to pack. The sun was setting, and the night promised only colder winds and darker shadows. But then, a shadow much larger than his own fell over him. At first, Jack thought it was another passerby about to step over him, but this shadow didn't move on. It stayed, unwavering, as if rooted in place. Slowly, Jack looked up, his heart quickening as a sense of unease mixed with faint curiosity. Before him stood a man, a giant of a figure dressed in a simple black hoodie and basketball shorts, his face partially hidden by sunglasses and a baseball cap. The stranger crouched down, bringing his towering frame to Jack's level. His voice, deep and resonant, broke through the street's cacophony like a beacon. "Hey, man, how's it going?" Jack blinked, startled. People didn't stop to talk to him, not like this. His throat tightened as 1,000 questions raced through his mind. Who was this man? What did he want? Jack cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper. Could be better. Just trying to get enough for a meal. The man's gaze softened as he glanced at the sign. Then he said something that pierced through Jack's wall of despair. "How about I do more than that? Let's get you sorted out today." Jack's heart skipped. For a moment he couldn't process the words. They sounded too good, too unreal. Yet there was no mockery in the man's tone, no hint of condescension. Just warmth. "You serious?" Jack asked, his voice trembling with both hope and doubt. The man smiled, standing tall and extending a hand. "Dead serious. Come on, let's get you something to eat." Jack hesitated, glancing at the meager coins in his hand and then at the man before him. His stomach growled again, louder this time, as if urging him to take a leap of faith. As Jack stood up, his legs wobbled under him, both from hunger and the sheer disbelief of what was happening. The man, now fully towering over him, seemed even larger than life, his frame broad and commanding, yet his demeanor calm and approachable. The casual black hoodie and basketball shorts only added to the mystery, making him seem more grounded than Jack had expected from someone with such presence. Jack's grip on the stranger's hand lingered for a moment longer than necessary, as if seeking assurance this wasn't some cruel joke. "What's your name?" the man asked, his voice steady and warm. "Jack," he replied hesitantly. "Well, Jack," the man said with a smile, "I'm Shaq." He pulled down his sunglasses just enough for Jack to catch a glimpse of those unmistakable eyes. Suddenly, everything clicked. "Shaquille O'Neal?" Jack stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. His mind raced, piecing together the familiar face with the name he had only ever heard on television or in passing conversations about basketball legends. Shaq chuckled, his grin widening. "The one and only. But don't make a big deal about it, all right? Let's just focus on you for now." Jack's heart pounded. The idea of a global icon stopping to help someone like him was almost incomprehensible. You don't have to do this," Jack mumbled, his voice cracking under the weight of both gratitude and embarrassment. Shaq tilted his head, his expression growing serious. "Man, it's just food," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Everybody deserves to eat. Trust me, I've been hungry before. No shame in it." For a moment, Jack felt his guard begin to lower. There was no pity in Shaq's voice, no judgment in his eyes, just a straightforward kindness that disarmed him completely. "All right," Jack said softly, still unsure if he was dreaming. "Good," Shaq said, patting Jack lightly on the back. "Let's get moving before your stomach starts yelling at me again." The pair began walking down the crowded boulevard. People turned their heads, some whispering, others openly snapping photos or pulling out their phones to record. Jack's unease grew with every passing second. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, at least not in a positive way. "Why is everyone staring?" Jack asked nervously, his voice barely audible over the noise of the street. Shaq smiled knowingly. "Don't worry about them," he said, his voice low and reassuring. "They're just curious. You're with me, and that's all that matters right now." As they approached a neon-lit barbecue joint, the rich aroma of smoked meats and tangy sauce filled the air. Jack's stomach growled again, louder this time, earning a laugh from Shaq. "See? Even your stomach knows this place is good," Shaq joked, holding the door open. Jack hesitated for a moment before stepping inside, his senses immediately overwhelmed by the warmth and the welcoming scent of food. For the first time in years, he felt something he hadn't dared to hope for, a glimmer of comfort. As they approached the counter, Shaq leaned down and whispered, "Order whatever you want, man. Today, we're doing this right." The warm, smoky aroma of the barbecue joint enveloped Jack the moment he stepped inside. His stomach rumbled in protest, louder now, as if it knew relief was just within reach. The bustling sounds of clinking plates, laughter, and muffled conversations filled the air. Shaq held the door open, his broad frame blocking much of the entrance, drawing the attention of everyone inside. All eyes turned toward them. Whispered exclamations of recognition rippled through the room like waves. Phones discreetly, and not so discreetly, aimed in their direction. "Relax," Shaq said, placing a reassuring hand on Jack's shoulder. "You're with me. Let them stare. It's nothing." Jack nodded stiffly, his nerves frayed. He hadn't felt this exposed in years. Yet somehow, Shaq's easy confidence seemed to wrap around him like a protective shield, warding off the weight of the stares. At the counter, Shaq grinned at the cashier, a young woman whose eyes went wide with disbelief. Yeah, it's me," he said casually, waving her oar aside. "But I'm not the star here. This guy is." He gestured to Jack. Jack flushed, unsure how to respond. Before he could mumble a protest, Shaq nudged him forward. "Go on, order whatever you want. No limits." Jack's eyes scanned the menu board, overwhelmed by the choices. Pulled pork sandwiches, ribs, brisket, mac and cheese, cornbread. It all sounded incredible, and far beyond anything he'd had in years. He hesitated, unsure where to start. "All right, let me help you out," Shaq said, leaning over. "The pulled pork here? Fire. And you've got to get the mac and cheese. Trust me." Jack swallowed hard and nodded. Pulled pork sandwich, mac and cheese, and sweet tea?" "Solid choice," Shaq said with an approving nod. Then, turning back to the cashier, he added, "And throw in the rib platter with extra sauce and a couple of those cornbread muffins." The cashier totaled the order, her hands trembling slightly as Shaq handed over a crisp $100 bill. "Keep the change," he said with a wink, leaving her momentarily speechless. They found a seat near the window, the aroma of the food making Jack's mouth water. When their plates arrived, Jack's eyes widened at the sight of the massive portions. The pulled pork sandwich overflowed with tender meat, the mac and cheese gleamed with creamy richness, and the sweet tea came in a generously sized glass. "Dig in," Shaq said, leaning back in his chair, a plate of ribs in front of him. Jack hesitated for a brief moment, then picked up the sandwich. The first bite sent a burst of smoky, savory flavor through his senses. He closed his eyes, savoring it, letting the warmth of the food wash over him like a balm to his battered spirit. "This is amazing," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I told you barbecue never disappoints," Shaq said with a chuckle, tearing into a rib. As the meal continued, Jack began to talk, his words halting at first but growing steadier under Shaq's attentive gaze. He recounted his story, the layoff that shattered his stability, the eviction that followed, and the relentless cycle of rejection and invisibility that came with homelessness. Through it all, Shaq listened intently, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. When Jack finally paused, his plate nearly empty, Shaq leaned forward, his expression serious but kind. "Listen, Jack," he said. "You've had a rough hand dealt to you, no doubt. But you're here right now, and that means there's still fight left in you. You just need someone to remind you of that." The remnants of their barbecue meal still lingered in Jack's mind as they stepped out onto the bustling street. His stomach was full for the first time in ages, and his heart felt a bit lighter. But before he could fully process the change in his mood, Shaq turned to him with a grin. "All right, my man," Shaq said, clapping a large hand on Jack's shoulder. "Now that you've got some food in you, how about we take this transformation up a notch?" Jack looked at him, puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Self-care, my friend," Shaq replied, his voice laced with enthusiasm. "Haircut, shave, hot shower, the works. There's a spa just a few blocks from here. They'll get you looking and feeling like a new man." Jack's instinctive response was to shake his head. "I don't know about that," he muttered, glancing down at his grimy hands and worn clothes. "Places like that, they don't want people like me walking in." Shaq stopped abruptly and turned to face Jack, his expression serious. "Hey," he said firmly, "don't ever think like that. You deserve this just as much as anyone else. Trust me on this, okay?" Jack hesitated, caught between doubt and Shaq's unwavering confidence. Finally he nodded, though uncertainty still lingered in his eyes. The walk to the spa felt surreal. The sleek, modern building stood in stark contrast to the chaos of the streets outside. Its polished glass windows and minimalist design exuded sophistication, a world Jack felt entirely removed from. As they entered, the soft hum of soothing music filled the air, and a receptionist at the desk looked up with a polite smile that froze in surprise when she recognized Shaq. "Mr. O'Neal!" she exclaimed, her professional demeanor slipping for a moment. Shaq offered her a friendly smile and gestured toward Jack. "Hey there. I've got my buddy here, Jack. He needs the full treatment. Haircut, shave, shower, the whole deal. Can you hook him up?" The receptionist's gaze shifted to Jack, her initial hesitation quickly replaced with warmth. "Of course," she said, motioning for one of the stylists to come over. "We'll take great care of him." Jack shuffled awkwardly as the stylist led him to the back. The brightly lit salon area was a world he hadn't stepped into for years. The stylist, a cheerful woman with a kind smile, chatted with him as she worked. She began with his hair, carefully untangling the matted strands before trimming it into a neat and stylish cut. The weight of his overgrown hair seemed to fall away with every snip, leaving him feeling oddly lighter. Next came the shave, a slow, meticulous process. The feel of the razor against his skin was soothing, almost meditative, as if each stroke peeled away years of weariness and despair. Finally, the stylist handed him a fresh towel and directed him to the showers. Jack stepped into the private stall, the warm water cascading over him. For the first time in what felt like forever, he stood still, letting the water wash away the grime and tension that had clung to him for so long. When he emerged, dressed in a simple but clean set of clothes Shaq had thoughtfully picked out, he caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror. The reflection staring back at him was almost unrecognizable. The man in the mirror looked hopeful, alive. As Jack stepped back into the lobby, Shaq was lounging in a chair, scrolling through his phone. He looked up and broke into a wide grin. "Look at you, man. Hollywood's going to be calling any day now." Jack laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that surprised even him. "I don't know about Hollywood, but I feel like a new person. Thank you." Shaq stood and clapped him on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear. Now that you're feeling good, let's keep this train rolling. We've got more to do." Stepping out of the spa, Jack felt an unfamiliar sensation coursing through him. Confidence. The clean-cut man reflected in the spa's glass door was far removed from the scruffy figure he had grown accustomed to. He touched his freshly trimmed hair, still slightly disbelieving. Shaq, standing beside him, gave a satisfied nod. "You're looking sharp, Jack. But there's one more thing we need to handle before we're done." Jack raised an eyebrow, uncertain. "What's that?" "Threads," Shaq replied with a grin. "You can't be walking around in those rags anymore. We're going shopping." Jack instinctively glanced down at his clothes. The borrowed, ill-fitting outfit from the spa was leagues better than what he'd been wearing earlier, but it was still basic. He hesitated, the old doubts creeping in. "I don't think I can—" he started, but Shaq cut him off with a raised hand. "None of that," Shaq said firmly. "Everybody deserves to feel good in their own skin. A fresh outfit can change the way the world sees you, and more importantly, how you see yourself." Jack nodded slowly, the conviction in Shaq's voice making it hard to argue. As they entered a bustling clothing store, Jack felt a wave of unease return. The polished floors, bright lights, and racks of neatly arranged clothes seemed far too extravagant for someone like him. His instinct was to fade into the background, but Shaq's towering presence made that impossible. "All right," Shaq said, clapping his hands together. "Pick out whatever you need. Shirts, pants, shoes, the whole deal." Jack shuffled toward a nearby rack, his eyes darting over the price tags. Each number felt like a dagger to his already fragile sense of worth. He reached for a plain t-shirt, but his hand hovered, unsure if even that was too much. "Come on, Jack," Shaq said from behind him, his tone light but encouraging. "You're not shopping for survival anymore. You're shopping for confidence. Find something you'll actually like wearing." Taking a deep breath, Jack moved to another section. Slowly, he began to pick out items: a pair of dark jeans, a couple of button-up shirts, socks, and sneakers. The essentials, nothing more. Shaq, however, wasn't having it. He wandered over with a sturdy jacket in one hand and a sleek backpack in the other. "You're going to need these too," he said, adding them to Jack's growing pile. "Shaq," Jack started, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is too much." Shaq turned to him, his expression serious but kind. "Jack, let me tell you something. I've been blessed in ways I couldn't have imagined growing up. Now it's my turn to pass that on. This isn't about me. It's about you. You've got a fresh start ahead of you, and I'm just giving you the tools to make it happen." Jack's throat tightened, his eyes burning with unshed tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "You don't have to," Shaq said, his tone softening. "Just promise me one thing. When you're back on your feet, pay it forward. Help someone else who needs it." Jack nodded, his voice failing him, but the determination in his heart spoke louder than words. At the checkout counter, Shaq paid without hesitation, even cracking a joke with the cashier about Jack being Hollywood's next big star. Jack, holding the neatly packed bags of clothes, felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. As they stepped back onto the street, Shaq looked over at Jack with a knowing smile. "How you feeling?" Jack glanced at his reflection in a nearby window. The man staring back was still him, but stronger, more put together, and ready to face the world. "Like I've got a chance," he said quietly. Shaq grinned and clapped him on the back. "That's what I like to hear. Now let's keep building on that." The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon as Shaq and Jack stepped out of the store, the weight of the shopping bags matched only by the emotions Jack carried within him. The bustling street felt different now, less daunting, more open. Jack looked down at the bags in his hands, marveling at the thought of having more than just the clothes on his back. "You know," Shaq began, his voice cutting through the hum of the city, "when I was younger, life wasn't always smooth. My family didn't have much. There were times we struggled to make ends meet." Jack glanced at him, surprised. It was hard to imagine a man like Shaq, a global icon with endless success, ever facing hardship. Shaq noticed Jack's expression and chuckled. "I know. It's hard to believe now. But back then, I learned something important. No matter how tough things get, kindness can change everything. I had people who helped me along the way. People who didn't have to, but did anyway. That's why I do this now." Jack's pace slowed as Shaq's words settled in. It wasn't just about the clothes or the food. This was about something much deeper. "That's amazing," Jack said, his voice low. "But why me? Out of all the people you could have helped today, why stop for me?" Shaq paused, looking Jack squarely in the eye. "Because you were there," he said simply. "You were in my path. And I believe when life gives you the chance to help someone, you take it. No questions asked." Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. "Words," Shaq continued, his tone growing softer but more resolute. "Here's the deal, Jack. I'm not just doing this for you. I'm doing it for everyone you're going to help one day. When you're back on your feet and you see someone who needs a hand, you don't turn away. You pay it forward. That's how we make this world a better place, one person at a time." The simplicity of the message hit Jack with an unexpected force. It wasn't just a challenge. It was a call to action, a purpose beyond mere survival. Jack nodded, his gaze fixed on the ground as he processed the weight of Shaq's words. "I promise," he said finally, his voice steady. "When I can, I'll do the same for someone else. I'll pay it forward." A smile broke across Shaq's face. "That's all I ask, man." He clapped Jack on the shoulder. "You've got this." For the first time in years, Jack didn't just feel like a recipient of someone's charity. He felt like part of something bigger, a chain of compassion that extended far beyond him. As the night deepened and the streets of the city began to quiet, Shaq and Jack stopped in front of an unassuming brick building. A simple sign outside read, "New Horizons Shelter." Warm light spilled out from the windows, illuminating a welcoming entrance. "This place," Shaq said, gesturing to the building, "is where things really start to change. They've got everything you need: a bed, hot meals, counseling, job training. It's a real second chance, Jack." Jack hesitated, the weight of uncertainty creeping in. "I don't know," he said softly. "What if I can't? What if I mess it up?" Shaq knelt slightly to meet Jack's eyes, his voice steady and firm. "Listen to me. You're not alone in this. These people are here to help you, just like I'm helping you. But you've got to meet them halfway, okay? You've got to believe you're worth it." Jack nodded slowly, Shaq's unwavering confidence giving him the push he needed. "Okay," he said, the determination in his voice growing stronger. Shaq walked him to the door and spoke briefly with a staff member, who greeted Jack with a kind smile and welcoming words. Before leaving, Shaq handed Jack a small card with his number on it. "Call me if you need anything," Shaq said, his voice full of encouragement. "And remember, one step at a time." The days that followed were some of the most challenging Jack had faced, but they were also transformative. At the shelter, he found more than just a place to sleep. He discovered a network of support, counselors who listened to his story without judgment, workshops that taught him how to navigate job interviews, and fellow residents who shared similar struggles. Jack threw himself into the opportunities with a determination he hadn't felt in years. Slowly but surely, progress came. First, he secured a part-time job at a local diner. The hours were long, and the pay was modest, but it was a start. Each paycheck brought him closer to his goal of independence. The challenges were relentless. There were moments of doubt when old fears crept in, whispering that it was all temporary, that he might fall back into the shadows. But in those moments, Jack thought of Shaq's words. "You've got this." The memory of Shaq's belief in him became a lifeline, pulling him through the hardest days. As weeks turned into months, milestones began to stack up. Jack saved enough to rent a small apartment, a modest space, but one he could finally call his own. With the stability of a roof over his head, he expanded his work hours and began planning for the future. Each step forward reignited the sense of purpose he thought he'd lost forever. For the first time in years, Jack didn't just survive, he lived. And with every small victory, he held on to the promise he had made to Shaq, to one day pay it forward. And Jack's life bore little resemblance to the shadowed existence he had once known. His modest apartment, though small, was filled with warmth, simple furniture, a few framed photos, and a sense of stability that he had thought was forever out of reach. Yet, amidst his newfound comfort, one promise remained etched deeply in his heart: to pay it forward. It started with small acts. On his way home from work, Jack would buy an extra sandwich and hand it to someone sitting on the sidewalk. At first, the gesture felt almost too familiar, a stark reminder of where he'd been. But every time he saw the gratitude in their eyes, he understood the profound power of such a simple act. From sandwiches, Jack moved on to conversations. He stopped and listened, offering advice when he could, but mostly just letting people feel seen, something he remembered craving in his darkest days. Soon, he began volunteering at the very shelter that had been his refuge. On weekends, he helped serve meals, sharing his story with those who felt trapped in the same cycle he had escaped. "You'll get through this," he'd tell them. "It's not easy, but it's possible. Someone helped me once, and now I'm here to help you." Word of his efforts began to spread. What had started as small gestures snowballed into something bigger. Jack organized drives for warm clothing and supplies during the colder months. He connected people with resources, drawing from the same programs that had helped him rebuild his life. One evening, after finishing a long day at the shelter, Jack sat quietly in his apartment, reflecting on the journey that had brought him here. He thought about Shaq, not just the food, the clothes, or even the encouragement, but the way Shaq had seen him when no one else did. For Jack, that moment wasn't just a turning point, it was a lifeline. Shaq had reminded him that he was more than his circumstances, that he still had worth, and that kindness could spark a transformation far greater than either of them had imagined. Now, as Jack looked around at the life he had rebuilt, he realized it wasn't just his own. Through every person he had helped, Shaq's act of generosity had rippled outward, touching countless lives. Do you feel inspired by Jack's journey? Does this story make you think about how one act of kindness could transform a life? Imagine if you were in Jack's shoes, or if you were Shaq. What would you do? Take a moment to reflect and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your feedback not only helps us grow, but also creates a space for others to connect and be inspired. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. By doing so, you'll be the first to hear more incredible tales that will touch your heart and spark your imagination. Thank you for being a part of this journey, and may your day be filled with kindness, hope, and a little bit of magic. See you in the next story.